For today's video, we will tackle about Uncle Tom's Cabin by Harriet Beecher Stowe. We will talk about the author's background, characterization, settings, plot summary of Phaeton's Pyramid, and morally of the story. Number 1. Author's background. Harriet Beecher Stowe, daughter of Lyman Beecher, a stern New England Calvinist preacher whose image of a God who predestined humans to heaven or hell left a mark on his children. One of her brothers is Henry Ward Beecher, the famous Brooklyn preacher. When her mother died, she was for made her father's influence even more important. Kumbaga, parang yung pagkamatay ng nanay niya is parang pinamana yung mga importante sa tatay ni Harriet sa kanya. 6.5 young age, she memorized 2,000 hymns and several long chapters in the Bible. When she was an adult, she substituted for her father's dogmas a religion of hope that stressed the love and compassion of Christ rather than the divine judgment that her father preached. At the age of 12, Harriet moved to Hartford to live with her old sister, Catherine, a purposeful woman who had started the Hartford Female Seminary. She attended Catherine School and stayed on as a teacher and guardian of young children. In 1832, she moved with her family to Cincinnati, Ohio, where her father had been offered the post as president of the Lane Theological Seminary. 3 years after arriving in Cincinnati in January 1836, Harriet Beecher married Calvin Stowe, a Lang professor. Stowe was very well of her preacher career during her years in the West. From 1836 and 1850, she had 8 children, and she might have more if she and Calvin had not already alternated taking rescues in Vermont over the years. In 1834, Harriet won a $50 prize for a New England sketch, which was published in the Western Monthly magazine. In 1842, Calvin wrote to his wife, "My dear, you must be a literary woman. It is a written book with the faith." Harriet also experienced the powerful emotions aroused by the slavery issue in Cincinnati during these years. On one visit to Kentucky Plantation, she saw slaves whom she later used as models for some of the characters in Uncle Tom's Cabin. Kumbaga, yung model ginamit niya sa Uncle Tom's Cabin. In 1836, a local mob attacked the print shop of an abolitionist in the city, and the struggle between the abolitionists and the moderate slaves eventually drove her father to retire and husband to take a job in Baldwin College in Maine in 1850. Let's talk about the characterization. Uncle Tom. A good poised Uncle Tom is the protagonist of Uncle Tom's Cabin. Even under the worst conditions, Uncle Tom always pray to God and find ways to keep his faith. As the novel progresses, the cruel treatment that Tom suffers at the hands of Simon Legree threatens in his belief in God. But Tom withstands his stabs and dies the death of Christian martyr. Number 2. Aunt Chloe. Uncle Tom's wife and Shelby's cook. Chloe often likes a jovial simpleton around the Shelbys to mask her more complex feelings. Number 3. Arthur Shelby, the owner of the Uncle Tom in Kentucky. Shelby sells to Tom to the cruel Mr. Halley to pay off his debts. An educated, kind, and basically good-hearted man, Shelby nonetheless tolerates and perpetuates slavery. Stowe uses him to illustrate that the immorality inherent in slavery makes villains of all his practitioners, not just the cruel masters. Number 4. Emily Shelby, Mr. Shelby's wife. Emily Shelby is a loving, Christian woman who does not believe in slavery. She uses her influence with her husband, try to help the Shelby slaves, and is one of the novel's many morally virtuous, insightful female characters. Number 5. George Shelby, called Master George by Uncle Tom. George is the Shelby's good-hearted son. He loves Tom and promises to rescue him from the cruelty into which his father sold him. After Tom dies, he resolves to free all the slaves on the family farm in Kentucky. More morally committed than his father, George not only possesses a kind heart but acts on his principles. Number 6. George Harris, Eliza's husband and an intellectually curious and talented mulatto. George loved his family deeply and willingly fight for his freedom. He confronts the slave hunter Tom Blocker and does not hesitate to shoot him when he impairs the family. Eliza Harris, Mr. Shelby's maid, George's wife and Harris' mother. Eliza is an intelligent, beautiful, and brave young slave. After Mr. Shelby makes known his plans to sell Eliza's son to Mr. Haley, she proves the force of her motherly love as well as her strength of spirit by making a spectacular escape. Her crossing of the Ohio River on patches of ice is the novel's most famous scene. Number 8. Harry Harris, Eliza and George's sons, a young boy. Number 9. Augustine St. Clair, Tom's master in New Orleans and Eva's father. St. Clair is a flighty and romantic man, dedicated to pleasure. St. Clair does not believe in God. He caresses and drinks every night, although he dotes on his daughters and treats his slaves with compassion. St. Clair shares his hypocrisy of Mr. Shelby in that he sees the evil of slavery but nonetheless tolerates and practices it. Number 10. Eva, St. Clair and Marie's angelic daughter. Eva, also referred in the book as Little Eva, her given name is Evangeline, is presented as an absolutely perfect child, a completely moral being, and an unteachable Christian. She laments the existence of slavery and sees no difference between blacks and whites. After befriending Tom while still a young girl, Eva becomes one of the most important figures in his life. In that, Eva becomes one of the text central Chris figures. Number 11. Miss Ophelia, St. Clair's cousin from the North Vermont, who comes to help him manage the household. Ophelia opposes slavery in the abstract. However, she finds the actual slaves somewhat distasteful and harbors considerable prejudice against them. After Eva's death, and through her relationship with Topsy, Ophelia realizes her failings and learns to slaves as human beings. Stowe hoped that much of her northern audience might recognize themselves in Ophelia and reconsider their views on slavery. Number 12. Marie, St. Clair's wife, a self-centered woman, petty, whining, and foolish. She is the very opposite of the idealized woman figure that appears repeatedly throughout the novel. Number 13. The Quakers. The Quakers, a Christian group that arose in 17th century England, dedicated themselves to achieving an inner understanding of God without use of creeds, clergy, or outward rites. The Quakers have a long story of contributing to social reform and peace efforts. In Uncle Tom's Cabin, many Quaker characters appear who helped George and Eliza, as well as many other slaves. Stowe uses him to portray a Christianity free of hypocrisy, self-righteous display, or bigoted conventions. This kind of Christianity, she implies, can play a crucial role in abolition of slavery. Number 14. Senator and Mrs. Bird. Mrs. Bird is another example of virtuous woman. She's trying to exert influence through her husband. Senator Bill exemplifies the well-meaning man who is sympathetic to the abolitionist cause of who nonetheless remains complacent or resigned to the status quo. Medyo marami yung characters dito sa Uncle Tobias. Pero konti na lang to. Number 15. Tom Locker, a slave hunter hired by Mr. Haley to bring back Eliza, Harry, and George. Tom Locker first appears as gruff, violent man. George shoots him when he tries to capture them, and after he is healed by the Quakers, Locker experiences a transformation and chooses to join the Quakers rather than return his old life. Miss 16. Mr. Haley, the slave trader who buys Uncle Tom's and Harry from Shelby, a gruff, coarse man. Haley presents himself as a kind of individual who treats his slaves well. Haley, however, mistreats his slaves, often violently. Number 17. Topsy, a wild and uncivilized slave girl who Miss Opera tries to reform. Topsy gradually learns to love and respect others, following by the example of Eva. Number 18. Simon Legree, Tom's ruthlessly evil master of Louisiana Plantation. A vicious, barbaric, and loathsome man, Legree fostered violence and hatred among his slaves. Number 19. Cassie, Legree's slaves, mistress and Eliza's mother. Cassie proves a proud of an intelligent woman and devises a clever way to escape Legree's plantation. And the last is 20. Emily, a young and beautiful slave girl whom Legree by himself, perhaps to place Cassie as his mistress. She has been raised as voice Christian. Third, settings. Maiksi lang to kasi yung settings nito parang yung pagkagawa ni Harriet is parang sinimbolize niya yung lugar niya dun sa Uncle Tom's Cabin. Parang same lang. The American South, Kentucky, and Louisiana. Eliza and George escape takes them through Ohio and several northern Quaker settlements, then itong Canada. So, ayan yung place kung saan naganap yung Uncle Tom's Cabin. The next one is the Freytag's Pyramid, that reported by Ortega and Jeff.
After being in debt, a Kentucky farmer named Arthur Shelby faces the prospect of losing everything he owns. Though he and his wife, Emily Shelby, have a great relationship with their slaves, Shelby decides to raise money by selling 2 of his slaves to Mr. Haley, a slave trader. The slaves in question are Uncle Tom and Harry, the young son of Mrs. Shelby's maid, Eliza. When Shelby tells his wife about his agreement with Haley, she is shocked because she has promised Eliza that Shelby would not sell her son. However, Eliza overhears the conversation between Shelby and his wife, and after warning Uncle Tom and his wife, Aunt Chloe takes Harry and flees to the north, hoping to find freedom with her husband, George, in Canada. So, the story begins when the Kentucky farmer faces some difficulties in their business. The farmer named Arthur tells his wife that they are losing the things they have. So he come up with a decision that is very hard to do, which is to sell their slaves, even though Mr. Shelby and his wife have a great relationship with their slaves. they have no choice but to sell them to earn money. The two slaves that they are going to sell is, the first one is Uncle Tom, who has a family and known as a religious one. And the other slaves is the son of Eliza, which is their maid. But Eliza accidentally overheard the conversation of the two, so he warned Uncle Tom while Aunt Chloe bring Harry to escape. The rising action of the story is when Eva falls into the river, Tom dives in to save her, and her father Augustine St. Clair gratefully agrees to buy Tom from Haley. Tom travels with the St. Clairs to their home in New Orleans, where he grows increasingly invaluable to the St. Clair household and increasingly close to Eva, with whom he devotes and shares Christianity. So when Uncle Tom leaves his family and previous owner Mr. Shelby, his new owner Haley takes him to a boat to be transported to become a slave market. While on the boat, he meets Eva, a little white girl who easily becomes his friend. Unexpectedly, Eva fell into the river. That's why Tom suddenly dives in to save Eva from drowning. This results to a sudden decision where Eva's father, St. Clair, agrees to buy Uncle Tom from Haley. So, Uncle Tom travels with Eva and his new owner, St. Clair, to the New Orleans, whom he had a great life in serving St. Clair.
Hi, my name is Jeferson, and today I will be tackling about the rising intonation or the initial situation, whatever you wanted to call that. Okay, so Mr. Shelby trades Tom and Eliza's son to slaver trader, Mr. Halley. Despite his misgiving, Mr. Shelby clears his debt by selling his faithful slave, Tom and Eliza's son, Harry. Eliza overhears enough to fear for her child. She asks her mistress, Mrs. Shelby, if she thinks master will sell her boy. Mrs. Shelby tells her not to be silly. However, Mr. Shelby has done just that and cleans his conscience by making Mr. Halley promise to sell his slave to good people. Meanwhile, George Harris, Eliza's husband, finds his own situation intolerable and he makes plans to escape Canada. Now let's move on to the conflict, in which this part you will see why there are some complicated things happened, or why the climax will happen. Eliza runs away with her son, while faithful Tom stays to be shipped south. Eliza overhears Mr. Shelby explain to his wife that he has sold Eliza's son and Tom, so the communication to the slave master is already done by the slave trader. After warning Tom of his fate, Eliza runs away with her son in the night, heading to Canada. This is the initial conflict that sets the story in motion. So now, let's move on to the complications or the conflict itself. Eliza makes it to the north side of the Ohio River, but Mr. Halley sends slave catchers after her. Meanwhile, Tom's relatively pleasant life with the St. Clairs is ruined when Eva and Augustine of St. Clair both die. So yeah, Eliza makes it to the north shore of the Ohio River, but Mr. Harley employs slave catchers with dogs to go after her. So Tom is taken south. He is bought by a kind family which is good and becomes good friends with the daughter. All seems well until both Eva and her father die, and Tom is put up for auction again. This complicates both situations. Eliza is still haunted, and Tom is no longer in touch with his family so that they can buy his freedom. And that is the now let's move on to the climax, which is the very heavy feeling part, or the very interesting part. What will happen to Tom, and what will happen to Eliza's son? Tom is sold to Simon Legree. So, Tom is done another auction, and he is sold to Simon Legree. Tom's sale to a cruel master, which is not good, brings the novel to its main point, demonstrating that slavery can leave good people in the power of evil, as represented by Legree. And this is the suspense part. You know what will happen when you are in a bad people. Maybe bad things might happen to you because they are bad people. They will do bad things to you. So we don't know what will they do to harm us. So let's just see if what happened to Tom. Cassie and Emmeline escape. Tom is tortured by refuses to betray them. He dies rather than confessing their whereabouts. That is very sad. That is very sad in Tom's part. Though the novel has reached its apex, there is still more to come. Despite the fact that Tom has been sold to a man clearly intent on using up his slave and spitting them out, we still wonder whether Tom might possibly survive. So, Tom let the other slave flee, and he remains just to help them. So it was like he sacrificed himself for other people. And whether Tom survived or not, our answer is no. He helps Cassie and Emmeline to flee, but when Legree discovers their escape, he tortures Tom, and eventually that tortures kill Tom. That is very sad, and I don't know why slavery become trend those days or to this story, but that's the story. Okay, so let's move on to the denouement of the story. Eliza and George Harris makes it to the Canada. Cassie is reunited with her daughter, Eliza, while George Harris is reunited with his sister. Madame de Fuchs George Shelby free his slaves. Once Tom has died, the story wraps up relatively quickly. We learn that George and Eliza have made it to Canada and they are doing well. Hope all. Though George Shelby, Cassie discovers where her daughter is, and Madame de Fuchs finds her brother, George Harris. George Shelby free his slaves after witnessing the horror of what happened to Tom. And that is the end of my report. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you have a great day. Bye-bye!
One of the biggest teachings in Christianity is to love your neighbor even if they are your enemy, and that is what Tom does. He puts every bit of trust he has into humanity, no matter how many times he is treated cruelly. His upstanding moral is symbolic to that of the Lord he praises. The moral lesson that we get in Uncle Tom's Cabin is we should be like Uncle Tom, who trusts the Lord and keeps his own faith even though there are a lot of challenges in life that are hard to solve. Even though we are mistreated by others, we should not do the same. Instead, we should forgive them and trust the plans of the Lord.